There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 202. And today in the show, we're exploring the idea of a true backcountry whitetail hunt in the boundary waters of northern Minnesota. And we're going to be joined here by several members of Sportsmen for the boundary waters to discuss this wilderness, how to pull off a hunt here, and why this area is currently at risk. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today in the show, we are covering a very different kind of topic than usual. We are talking about backcountry whitetail hunting. And in last week's podcast, you might remember I'd hinted to the fact that this coming fall, I'm planning a canoe-in backcountry whitetail hunt into this wilderness. So today I wanted to dive much, much deeper into that topic. And, you know, so much of the whitetail hunting that we talk about on this podcast is focused on just the usual everyday ag field and woodlot type landscape that so many of us here across the country deer hunt in on an annual basis. And that's awesome. I get a kick out of it. I love it. But I've also been personally interested in kind of getting more intrigued by the idea of venturing off to some more unique places to chase my favorite game species. You know, I really want to try to find ways to stretch myself as a deer hunter, to experience new ways of hunting, explore new places. And this idea of the boundary waters, it has been top of my list when it comes to this kind of idea. So very quickly, for those not familiar, the Boundary Water Canoe Area Wilderness is just a vast, primitive wilderness area in northern Minnesota. We're talking an area, I believe it's over 1 million acres in size, and it's composed of miles and miles and miles of lakes and rivers and huge forests and rocky cliffs and escarpments and just a really rugged and impressive landscape. And the only way to get around in it, at least during the spring, summer, and fall, is to hike or canoe. So my plan is to load all of my gear for a week of whitetail hunting and camping in a canoe and paddle and portage deep into this wilderness until I find some deer, hopefully. And I think it's just going to be a really challenging, really interesting, really fun trip. But, you know, what originally brought this area, the Boundary Waters, to my attention a few years ago was the fact that not only is it special, but it's also a place facing increased risk. From everything I've read and heard and seen, this is one of the nation's most impressive and precious wild places, but it's in some serious danger here. So I've been doing more and more research on what's going on here, and as I've done that, I've gotten more interested in both kind of finding a way to see it for myself and then trying to, you know, lend a hand if I can at all to make sure this place is around and in a, you know, a healthy condition so that maybe some of you folks can see it someday, maybe my son can see it someday. And that's kind of how this trip idea and this podcast idea finally all came together. So here in a moment, I'm going to be getting 3 more guys on the line with me. Dan can't join us today, but we will have 3 guests. They are all very familiar with the Boundary Waters, and we're going to be talking about the wilderness in general. We're going to be talking about what it's like to deer hunt there, And then finally, we're also going to talk a little bit about what's going on there, what these dangers are that the Boundary Waters are facing. So joining us here in a second is Lucas Leaf, the National Sporting Director for Sportsmen for the Boundary Waters, Matt Norton, the Policy Director for Sportsmen for the Boundary Waters, and another avid hunter and angler from the area, Daryl Spencer. So I think regardless of whether or not you ever plan on hunting or fishing or exploring the Boundary Waters yourself, I think this is a chat that everyone and anyone can enjoy and learn something from. We just cover some very interesting things, some very different ways of deer hunting. But I do think that, regardless, this is the kind of place, this is the kind of adventure that I think, if nothing else, is fun to hear about and then daydream about in the future. I know I certainly have been doing a lot of daydreaming about this place too. So with all that said, let's pause here for a moment for our Sitka story of the day, and then we're going to dive right into it.
For this week's Sitka story, we're joined by Seth Healy, who tells us about a recent goose hunt that meant a little more.
Well, it was early January, and my buddy Andy, his best friend had actually unexpectedly passed away. And, they were both big goose hunters, and there was three of them that really goose hunted together. I'm not a big waterfowl guy. So we decided to go out the very last day of season, and, they hadn't hunted much since he had passed away. So we go out the last day of season, and the night before he had seen a goose with a white head, and that was the one that Andy had wanted to shoot the most. And so, it's not even 2 minutes after shooting time, and three geese come in, and Skylar and I had completely missed the first one and ended up shooting the last two. Well, Andy, which was the guy's best friend that had passed away, had shot that white-headed goose, and with his gun and his decoys, and it was just kind of like, the guy that passed away had almost sent that bird directly to Andy. It was just an unforgettable moment, and definitely an emotional hunt for, both of those guys that were using his stuff.
On Seth's hunt, he was wearing Sitka's Dakota system. If you'd like to create a Sitka story of your own, or to learn more about Sitka's technical hunting apparel, visit sitkagear.com.
All right, with me now on the line, we've got a whole slate of folks with us again today. We have Lucas Leaf, Matt Norton, and Daryl Spencer. And rather than me trying to rattle off a big introduction of my own, I was hoping that you guys could maybe give us a brief kind of cliff notes as to who each of you are. So maybe, Lucas, could you kick things off for us by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your involvement with the Boundary Waters?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. So I'm the National Sporting Director for Sportsmen for the Boundary Waters. We work to protect the Boundary Waters for future generations, currently from sulfide ore copper mining, but, that's just a part of my background. I've been going up there since I was 13, everything from rough grouse hunts to spring opener lake trout trips. And, I'm a big hunter and angler. Spend a lot of time up there. I'm also a chef as well, so I've been doing a lot of work, especially with the campaign that both Matt and I work with, and Daryl as well. And I'm also the current chef of Modern Carnivore, which, we can chat a little bit about later if it comes up. But yeah, my basic background is basically I spend a ton of time up in the Boundary Waters. I care about it so much. It's near and dear to my heart. My dad started bringing me up there when I was 13, and, it's our church. So it's a space that's near and dear to me and very important for the kids I plan on having and for everybody that I know and that I've introduced to it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Modern Carnivore before we move on to the rest of the guys? I'm kind of curious to hear a bit more on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Modern Carnivore was developed as a way to introduce people who have not experienced hunting and angling or the idea of self-sustainability and acquiring meat through means that is hunting and fishing. So basically introducing people to hunting and angling opportunities and letting them taste food bringing them out on excursions, and also doing dinners and get-togethers where we give them the opportunity to not only make the decision themselves, but to experience what is kind of a long-standing tradition here in America and, across the world, which is acquiring our own food by means of fishing, hunting, growing your own food, so foraging as well. So all things that I'm super into. I'm big into foraging, mushrooms and lots of things during the spring and throughout the summer and fall. So seasonality is key. It's just a lot of fun, and it's very cool to see the reaction of people when they've been introduced to something that they didn't know that was right in their backyard, or that they have such an easy opportunity to go and acquire themselves.
Well, yeah, that's great. That sounds like a great opportunity to help engage people. That it seems more and more our opportunity to engage with new hunters and bring new people into our community is through food. So that's sounds like a great deal you guys got going there. I'd love to dive more into that later too. But Matt, I guess can we jump over to you, Matt? Can you give us a quick intro to yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm the policy director for the campaign and Sportsmen for the Boundary Waters. I love paddling. I love hunting. I love fishing. Wilderness areas are important to me, and being able to get a really high quality outdoor experience is important to me. And I'm a big fan of the Boundary Waters because it's incredibly accessible. If you're willing to paddle, if you're willing to work the experience, it's enormous. Really, as soon as you put in on your first lake, you're experiencing a backcountry environment. And I've been paddling in the Boundary Waters since I first moved here to Minnesota in 1999. Prior paddling trips were in provincial parks in Canada, particularly Algonquin Provincial Park in eastern Ontario. I've got a biology background, and I came to hunting late in life. I did not go through the modern carnivore routine, but I did not, as many, I guess, higher percentages today of people are, growing up in households where the parents don't really hunt or fish. That's less true in Minnesota, where a huge percentage of people fish and a decent percentage of people hunt. But so I came to hunting and fishing out of my own interest, and in particular, that opportunity to find high quality experiences, but also high quality fish and venison.
I was just going to ask you a little bit more about what a policy director actually does for an organization like this. What does that actually mean?
Sure. Well, the effort to save the Boundary Waters from the biggest threat that that's in front of it, which is sulfide ore copper mining, a particularly toxic type of mining, that's never been done successfully anywhere in the U.S. Or anywhere in the world. If success is defined as operating and closing without polluting surrounding surface water and groundwater with heavy metals and other mining contaminants. So we've got right now a big job interacting with federal agencies, particularly the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, and the departments above them, U.S. Department of Agriculture in the case of the Forest Service, and Department of Interior in the case of the Bureau of Land Management. And interacting with them typically means, if you're doing it in a formal fashion, producing a fair amount of written information that explains what science, what factual information you've got, and experiential information you can convey to them to explain just how bad, for how long it would be if sulfide or copper mining were allowed to begin in the watershed that flows down into the boundary waters. And I don't know if your listeners, can appreciate, these are public lands. I'm hopefully just describe it a little bit so you can imagine it. But this is a 1.1 million acre wilderness area. It's under U.S. Forest Service, management. There's more than 1,175 lakes larger than 10 acres. They are massively interconnected, and so you can paddle from lake to lake, or sometimes paddle to the end of a lake and portage, that is, carry all your stuff, a canoe and your portage bags with your goods from one lake into another, and just keep going. You could literally spend a year paddling in the boundary waters without repeating your track. So I write and I read and interact with experts and make sure we make a compelling case to our federal agencies about why this type of mining should not happen in the boundary waters.
It sounds like important work, obviously, and obviously you seem to be one who's well cut up for it. So I'm glad we got someone like you who can dig into all the minutia of the policies and the different issues and the science. I've read a lot of the different paperwork and studies that you guys have cited and different things on your website, and there's a lot of detail it goes into, and I imagine a lot of that is of your doing. So that's impressive, the level of detail you guys have gone into trying to understand what really is at stake here, what's going to happen, what could happen, and why we might want to put on the brakes a little bit when it comes to some of these things. And in a little bit, I want to dive in much more deeply into what exactly is being proposed, why the boundary waters are at risk, why there's been so much talk about it. But Daryl, I guess, real quick, let's hop over to you real quick to finish off our introductions. What's your story?
Live in Duluth, Minnesota. Went to school at the University of Minnesota Duluth and fell in love with the area. Close to the boundary waters, close to Superior National Forest, close to Chippewa National Forest, and loved to hunt and fish, and said I would never leave, and I didn't. And raising two boys here in Duluth, and lived to hunt, and small businessman, always have been, and try to have a business that allows me to hunt a lot and fish a lot, and so far it's worked out pretty well.
Smart man. That's the way to do it. So the reason why I originally wanted to, get all of you three here together to talk with me about this is because, I personally have become intrigued with the boundary waters over the past few years. I've spent a lot of time exploring public lands out west, and I've spent a lot of time in northern Michigan, my home state, doing a lot of things there, but I've never really spent any time in Minnesota. But I think maybe it was back in 2015 I started hearing about some of these things you alluded to, Matt, about this mine proposal and leases, and that kind of brought attention for me just to what this place is, and hearing about the paddling opportunities and the hunting opportunities and the fishing and just that wilderness experience. And I've always had a little bit of my heart has always been tied to that kind of place where you can canoe into a wild place. Because as a kid, I grew up going every summer to upstate New York to the Adirondack Mountains, where my great uncle had a little cabin. And I just spent, several weeks of summer just canoeing all over the place. And as like a 10-year-old, I felt like I was in the biggest, wildest place you could ever see. Obviously, there were motorboats all around me, but at times it sure felt like a pretty wild, awesome experience. And when I started looking into what the boundary waters, had to offer, I saw that same kind of opportunity to go deep into a wild place, a quiet place, and be on your own, and be, being a man-powered type adventure. And so it's always been something I've thought about. And then, me personally, as the years have gone on as a deer hunter, I've gotten more and more interested in different types of deer hunting trips. So as a serious whitetail guy in my everyday life, I do a lot of stuff in the farmland of the Midwest, a lot of your typical whitetail hunting, but I've been intrigued with taking my love for whitetails and going into bigger, wilder, woollier places and having a unique experience. And the Boundary Waters kind of jumped out to me this year as, wow, what a great opportunity to see something very different, to experience something very different than your typical whitetail hunt. And, experience this place, learn about this place, talk about this place during a time where it needs a little bit of love and care right now, it sounds like. So to set that stage just a little bit more, and Matt, you kind of started with it, but for people that aren't familiar with the Boundary Waters, I kind of want to help paint a picture for them. And I guess I haven't been there, so I would love you guys to paint a little bit more of a picture for me. And Daryl, you just mentioned how much you like to hunt and fish and spend time there. Can you give us just a quick painting? What would you say is so special about the Boundary Waters? What is time spent in the Boundary Waters like? Kind of give us a glimpse into that kind of experience.
Well, Boundary Waters is a 1 million acre area. It extends along about 80 to 90 miles of the U.S. border with Canada. And it makes up most of the United States side of what's really a transnational U.S. and Canada lakeland wilderness area that totals up to be about 2.5 million acres. The water in this area is some of the purest water on Earth. Extremely high quality water you can drink straight from the middle of the lake. These waters are and healthy for us. There's no roads, no motors on the inside of the Boundary Waters. Only a few lakes really on the and a couple of spots on the edges where low horsepower motors are allowed, but the vast majority of it, no motors. And you're moving around through the landscape the way people moved through that landscape centuries and thousands of years ago. It's an incredible area. Tremendous habitat for migrating birds, some incredible diversity of birds, great fishing, just vast fisheries across the, almost 1,200 a good-sized lake. Very healthy because the relative fishing pressure is low. Just you couldn't fish that area enough to really make a very heavy impact on the fisheries, and so it's healthy fisheries. And planes are not allowed to land in the wilderness area except under emergency conditions, and float planes under emergency conditions. And so, if you're willing to work for it, you can get, you can portage many lakes in and get into an area where you're unlikely to see people for days. Really a great experience. I mean, Daryl, what would you add to that?
To me, it's all about travel. It's all about getting back to the rhythm of life and hard work. And there's no other place like it. Maybe the Adirondacks, like you were talking, but when I was in my 20s and 30s, I went there too much. I mean, I loved it to death. I'd go 6 to 10 trips a year. I'd constantly try to find a different route. I'd take groups up there. I'd take just a friend up there. I'd take solo trips with my dog, and a lot of them were testing myself to see if I could do, 80, 90, 100 miles in 3 days. And, traditional routes too that the Voyageurs took. I've done the border route, which is basically the entire top of the Boundary Waters. I've done the Hunter's Island Loop, which is 260 miles and up into Canada and back around. And now that I've gotten older, to be honest, I don't like being around all the people, and so I rarely go in there unless it's early spring, fall to hunt, and the winter. And I just enjoy that. That's the best way to explain it. I just had my son take his girlfriend there for the first time, and I told him, I said, I hope you feel after 2 to 3 days the rhythm of life, where all you care about is work, eat, and sleep. And they came back and said they did, so it was pretty cool.
It's very cool. I can definitely relate to that power that a kind of immersion in a wilderness has to help you just get your mind off of everything else. You're not thinking about work. You're not thinking about the chores at home or paying the bills or anything. I think anytime you can get away from that for a while, it's as woo-woo and cheesy as it might sound, it really has a powerful, almost spiritual effect, at least for me. And it sounds like this is the kind of place that has that too. Lucas, would you add anything to all this as far as what this place is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of on the same page as Daryl is. I grew up going on spring lake trout trips up there, so you're paddling in and not knowing if the ice is going to be off the lakes. And I've had experiences where, especially with my dad, that we've had to camp on a portage to wait for the ice to come out. And it definitely, for me, it resonates as a place to go to release and forget about society and kind of reboot your batteries. There's so many different opportunities. As Daryl was saying, you can go up for a rough grouse hunt. You can go up, you're going up for a whitetail deer hunt, or you're going for that spring lake trout hunt. You get in the right space in June, and you miss people for walleye too. So there's so many opportunities to go up there and experience this vast, amazing place by yourself without running into people, if you hit the right spots. I mean, it is one of the most visited wildernesses in the nation, with over 150,000 people every year, but it's so huge that you have an opportunity to experience something that doesn't exist anywhere else here. So for me, it's really been about not only my own experiences, but introducing it to others as well. And I can say for absolutely for a fact that every single person that I've brought up and I've introduced to this place has become hooked. No pun intended, but it is an amazing space. I wish I was there right now. So,
yeah, I agree. What does this place? What do the boundary waters actually look like, Lucas? Can you tell us about the terrain, the vegetation, the look and feel of it all? It's very, very different from southern Minnesota, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Matt touched on it earlier. It's 1.1 million acres of interconnected lakes, streams, rivers, wetlands, with countless different opportunities for, fishing and hunting, world-class opportunities, smallmouth bass, lake trout, walleye, northern pike, rough grouse, whitetail. You're really stepping back into time when you go up there. And that's why it's so important that, it has been protected that the way it is. You're stepping into a northern forest that doesn't really exist anywhere else, except for, going up into the Quetico, which is the sister area, which is about 1 million acres in Canada as well. So I can't express more that, as much as I like to describe exactly what it is, you can't know unless you experience it for yourself. The quietness, the solitude, just the experience itself is you can't compare it to anywhere else.
I'd say that I'd characterize the landscape up there. It's boreal forest mixed in with some with northern bits here and there of eastern broadleaf forest. You've got rolling hills, you've got cliffs, and some really precipitous cliffs and very deep lakes in places. The water is, I've already said it's clean enough to drink, but enormous amounts of interconnected lakes in a very healthy, forested, hilly, and kind of cliff-strewn landscape. There's really, I think, a lakeland wilderness is really the best way to describe it, and there really isn't any equivalent anywhere else in the U.S. In fact, it's the biggest wilderness area east of the Rockies and north of the Everglades. So it's, for most of America, this is the nearest big wilderness that they've got.
I was going to say, and just to touch on what Matt was saying, there's individual lakes untouched there that produce their own ecosystems. You could go from one lake to another, and the lake trout, what they're feeding on is completely different. The color of the fish, the ecosystem that they're living in, it's an amazing thing. I mean, I've fished a lake a quarter mile from each other, and depending upon the waters that are going into each lake, you have a completely different experience, different taste. It's just amazing.
I'd add to it. To me, Mark, it looks like Minnesota, and the difference is it's the one place where there aren't motors, there's not logging, and there's very small amounts of motorized recreation. It's the one quiet place in Minnesota, but it looks like a lot of other places. It looks like Superior National Forest. It looks like Chippewa National Forest, without the roads, without the ATVs, and without a lot of the people.
It sounds pretty special, and it sounds like, what's neat about this area is that, I think Matt, you mentioned that it's so relatively so accessible for a lot of people, east of the Mississippi. A lot of people when they think about big wilderness, they assume they have to go to Alaska or Montana or Wyoming or something like that. But the boundary waters are pretty darn close to people in Wisconsin or Iowa or Nebraska or Illinois. It's within reach of a day's drive, and you can be in this vast, wild, quiet, special place. And I think that's kind of cool for myself and my listeners, and the fact that a lot of us deer hunters here in the Midwest or different parts of the country feel like we're so far from these bigger, wilder places. But in this case, not really. And not only that, but it's a big, wild place where you can take your hunting experiences in Michigan or Illinois or Georgia, and you can apply it a little bit and chase whitetails in the boundary waters, which is what has intrigued me so much. And Daryl, I saw some pictures you sent over of some really beautiful looking whitetail bucks that you have hunted up there. And so obviously you know what you're doing. It sounds like you've been out there hunting quite a bit. So I gotta ask you, what is deer hunting in the boundary waters like? I'm imagining and assuming it's very different from deer hunting in most other places. Can you walk us through a little bit about what a hunt there is like? What's that look like?
It's a lot different than even hunting in northern Minnesota in Superior National Forest or Chippewa National Forest. My wife and I have a hunting camp up by Grand Rapids in the central part of the state in Chippewa National Forest. It's real remote, way back in the middle of nowhere, and actually we're lucky enough to have a big non-motorized area next to us. So I do a lot of sneak hunting in there, and I really like it because I don't have OHVs in there, that kind of thing. But, not too far down the road, there's guys that own land, and they're building food plots, and that's pulling deer even off of the national forest land, that I like to hunt on, and it's congregating deer in that area. And the boundary waters is like the last place we have left to go and hunt them on their own terms. Nothing is being manipulated to screw that up. And it's pretty cool. And it's not like hunting. I grew up in central Minnesota with farms. You figured out where they bedded. You figured out where they ate, and you tried to intercept them in between or get them when they're going there. The boundary waters is not like that. They eat everywhere. There's food all over the place. They're browsing up there. Bedding areas, is there like one bedding area they use? Not at all. A lot of it has to do with just them surviving. And them surviving might mean that there might be wolves in the area, and I might push them out a mile this way, 2 miles this way, 3 miles this way, and they'll just stay in that area if they're safe. And then if they're not safe and see people, or they have wolves, or not enough food, then they'll move from there. And there's just a lot of. It's a really cool place to hunt. There's a lot of traditional trails they use, trails that have been used for hundreds of years. During rut, there can be places that have sign that would blow your mind. And we've had one winter, one hunt in the fall. We found a spot that had 50 scrapes on the ground within 200 yards.
Wow.
And so that would make you want to just sit there for a week. That's quite the spot. And had some traditional trails there too. And we ended up sitting there, and we ended up shooting a big buck there. But I've been in a lot of situations where I've had good deer sign and sat there for 2 days and didn't see a thing, and it's just because they're getting moved around. And so I'm real big on sneak hunting. I'm real big on moving and trying to find them, because there's just so much land for them to hide in, and if they're not there, they're not there. And so I do a lot of paddling and a lot of walking.
Yeah, so I'm assuming the deer density is pretty low. Is that right? And then what about the age of deer? Do you see a lot of older deer simply because there's not as many hunters, or is that not the case?
The deer density is low. I mean, they guess on that. Somewhere between 1 to 5 deer per square mile is what I normally hear up there. You got to be tough to live up there. Tough place to live. If you see a buck, it's big. If they survive up there. I mean, we've had years up there where we've seen 10 deer. 7 of them were bucks, and of the 7, 5 were, really big bucks, big mature bucks.
Wow.
We've had, we always see deer. We always tell each other you're going to have one opportunity. And usually, almost every year, we have one opportunity. So I've had years where I've jumped 6 or 8 bucks and, had an opportunity to get a couple shots off, but usually I'm lucky to get one opportunity to actually get a shot off.
How do you, that all sounds about what I expected. And one of the biggest challenges, though, just looking at this from the outside in, is, and you alluded to this earlier, the fact that in so many other places in whitetail country, okay, they bed here, they feed here. How do I get in between, or how do I, find a pinch point during the rut and wait for them to cruise by? There's different kind of basics to deer hunting to find, understanding where deer are and where you need to be. But in a landscape like this, it just seems, to your point, it seems they could be almost anywhere. How do you go about finding deer? Is there any kind of terrain or habitat type that you've noticed they tend to congregate around more, or anything that you've used to kind of figure out where your starting point is?
Well, when we pick the spot where we deer hunt now, and we can't tell you where that is, we'd have to kill you.
Of course, I would never ask you that.
When we picked the spot, we used topo maps, and we looked at, just general areas where we thought would hold deer. And one of the things we looked at, there was a huge blowdown up there, which blew down a lot of food. And we hunt close to that blowdown area. And there are more deer there than other areas of the boundary waters. There are areas of the boundary waters where there aren't many deer. And this area here holds quite a few deer.
So looking for those irregular features.
Yep. And so we pray a lot like those eastern trackers, Hal Blood, the Benoits. We pray for snow. We pray for wet. We pray for wind. And if I can get, a wet ground and some wind, then I'll just go and I'll just sneak hunt and try to sneak up to a buck and hit habitat that has held deer in the past. If I get snow, then I will take it a step farther and try to find a good track and get on it. Does
bow hunting up there sound like a a crazy idea given the challenges that you've talked to, or do people successfully ever do that?
So there are people that bow hunt up there. It's crossed my mind. I bow hunt a ton around Duluth, Minnesota, and that's kind of my one special week that I go up there, and since I can use a gun, I use a gun. And, we've shot deer at 15 yards, we've shot deer at 30 yards, and we've shot deer at 80 yards. Most of the shots are relatively close. I use a scope that's basically designed for jump shooting. It's a 2x7. Wouldn't be afraid to use open sights either. Wouldn't be afraid to go up there with the muzzleloader. If the water was open, I'd go up there with a open-sighted muzzleloader too. But you can certainly bow hunt up there. The big thing is just make a good shot. You don't want to be tracking, an animal up there. It's easy to get lost. You don't have all those reference points to find your way back. A lot of times your reference point is a lake, and all of a sudden you find yourself a mile south of that lake, and it's pretty tricky getting back to it, and yeah, you can say you have a GPS, and I do carry a GPS and I use it, but I still have a compass, and I still use that compass to get me back to the general area where my canoe was and where my camp was. But there's no road to hit,
Yeah, very different. Now, you mentioned sometimes you canoe around. How do you I had someone else send me a message or something who said that his buddies just will hop in their canoe for the day and just paddle around the edges or paddle down rivers and hope to just spot one while they're paddling and then make a move in that kind of way. How do you do something like that at all?
I've shot deer in my canoe before, not in the boundary waters in Chippewa National Forest. Hunting a river, a zigzaggy river, where it's easy to sneak up to ducks and it's easy to sneak up to deer. Paddling around a lake and hoping to bump into a buck. You never know. During the rut, they do dumb things. I've heard of it, but that's not in general how I hunt. I mean, I pick areas where I know a whole deer, and every year our inventory of good places to hunt increases, and get up in the morning and play the wind. The wind is here. These 4 spots would be good, and go to those 2 spots, and if the wind changes, you might go to a different spot. Maybe it's a day where the wind changes and decide to explore another spot. But it's just a lot of alone time, which I love, being in the woods by myself, being in the backcountry by myself, and exploring new country. And I can hunt the whole day, never see a deer, and come back to camp and just say, wow, what a great day.
Yeah.
It's a pretty special place. You don't see anyone. And to be honest, I was super apprehensive about coming on here, Mark, because I've listened to your podcast many times, but I don't want to see you up there or anybody else up there in the backcountry. And I don't think we will bump into each other. It's one thing to say you're going to do it. It's another thing to do it.
Yeah.
It's like I said, I mean, there's a lot of places you can say you like the backcountry and all that, but, in Minnesota, Chippewa National Forest, Superior National Forest, there's a lot of backcountry areas, but there's always a road you can reference. And even if you get totally turned around and lost, you could set up camp for the day, and the next morning, you walk north 6 miles, you're going to hit the road. But in the boundary waters, you screw it up. You could be in Canada, and then you could hit that other million acre wilderness up there, and you got a long walk. So, it's pretty serious backcountry travel. You better know what you're doing with a GPS and a compass. And that's just something I just love to do. I like to go get lost every single day and find my way out. It's just a way for me to test and improve my skills.
Yeah. I 100% understand where you're coming from, and the desire to not want to bump into anyone else. I get that. If I see you up there, I'll make sure to turn the other way and make sure you don't spot me. But it's to your point, though, it does seem like the kind of experience that you better be prepared for. It's not the kind of place you can just show up and take off and think it's going to be just like driving down to the nearest woodlot and hunting back on your back 40. And it's funny you mentioned that. Just last night, my buddy who's going to go on this trip with me, he's been thinking about it and doing all sorts of research and all that. And he texted me. He's like, "Do you realize how little space is going to be left in a canoe after we load for the week? ... Stressing a bit. Probably not going to have a hard bow case, huh?" and yeah, that seems like the logistics of pulling off something like this have got to be pretty challenging too. How do you? I mean, anything you could add on that, Daryl or Matt, as far as the logistics of getting everything in and out? It seems like that's a trick in itself.
Well, we've got each of us have an outline of the things that we bring, and we do this trip together. So there's things that Matt brings, there's things that I bring. We've got some mutual things. We've had canvas wall tents. We've had a stainless stove, wood stove. That whole setup weighed close to 60 pounds. When I was in my 30s, I just thought nothing of it. And now that we've gotten older, we've lightened things up. Now we've got a tent that's made out of parachute material, a lot like a Seek Outsider, a Kafaru. We have a company in Minnesota called Cook Custom Sewing that made it. And then we've got a titanium stove. The whole setup weighs 20 pounds, so that's pretty cool. And then just, everything is fine-tuned, from your socks to the number of underwear you need, how many gloves. And, you look at the forecast and tweak it a little bit here and there. But, if you're going there, I'd be happy to sit on the phone with you and go through my list a little bit and help you out, picking the right things. And we bring some luxury things that we don't have to bring, in the tent. We have cots, which is nice to get off the ground. It's also nice to be able to store things under the cot. It makes for a lot more room in your tent. We bring a great meal the first night or two. We actually bring venison steaks the first night, salad and potatoes, and the second night we do burritos with leftover venison. And then from that point on, we're eating Mountain House, which is fine. I mean, you're so tired at the end of the day that you eat a Mountain House and you're sleeping by 7:30 at night.
Yeah. Matt, would you add anything on that front?
Well, we use a pair of canoes, so that increases our, ability to get material in and get it out. Hopefully, with a buck in the canoe with you. I think having two canoes is a little bit safer. Daryl, I think, would agree with that. In fact, I think rather than getting a big Minnesota 3 or something like that to carry us in the gear, which would be close, I think Daryl recommended taking the two solo canoes the first time we went up there. Go with wool and make sure that you've got a dry bag full of extra wool and shell layers. You don't necessarily know what the weather's going to be like. And you can get into a situation where either because you didn't control, you weren't able to control how much you're sweating, or, in a really bad situation, if you were to roll the canoe, where you need to be able to get dry and get warm really fast. It's tipping a canoe in November in Minnesota, northern Minnesota, is not a cute thing to happen. It's you're taking your life in your hands, and so make sure you got all your important gear in dry bags.
The canoe thing is a big deal. The water temperature is so cold then. Even in mid-October, I think I had heard that's kind of when you're thinking about going.
Yeah.
You cannot flip your canoe. You cannot go swimming. If you do, you might die. So you need to make sure that the lake is paddleable. If you're a good canoer, that's different than if you haven't paddled a lot. I mean, if there's 3-4 footers and you're not a good paddler and you're in a solo canoe, I don't know if I'd go out. We've had days where we just hunted on foot because the lake was too, there was too much wind. If you get a chance to rent a canoe, my opinion would be the best canoe for hunting up there, a solo canoe, is a canoe called the Solo Plus, made by Winona, and all the outfitters in the Ely will have it. And it's a canoe that you can paddle with two people, or it's got a center seat. It's got a lot of volume to it, and it actually paddles really nice. And then, make sure you have two paddles too. There's a lot of people that have broken a paddle or lost a paddle, and in a solo boat, make sure you have two paddles.
That's great advice.
Yeah, that extra paddle. The other thing, this probably goes without saying, but it's a time of the year, particularly November, when, and lately we've had a lot of really abnormally warm hunts, but that's not always that way. And you should really watch your long-term weather forecast. And, the night before you go up or the morning of, if you can print out a long-term forecast for what the temperatures and what the wind direction and speeds are likely to be, that's less about hunting than making sure that you know when winds are expected to drop and temperatures are expected to drop. Because if you paddle in, paddle and portage and paddle again, you are in a situation where if the wind speeds drop overnight and the temperatures are in the teens, you could wake up and find that there's ice on the lake in the morning. You can't paddle a solo canoe, safely, even with two people, breaking ice in front, not when you're loaded with gear. So you just have to be careful to make sure you can get out after you've gotten in.
That's another important piece of equipment we bring is a weather radio, and we're checking it all the time. And this year's the perfect example. We went to Ely on Friday morning and looked at the forecast, and I said to Matt, Matt, this temperature drops 2 degrees, we're coming out. And we both wanted to go so bad. And by Saturday afternoon, we knew we were coming out in a hurry, and thank God we did, because by Tuesday, lakes are freezing up there.
Wow. So considering this topic of climate and temperatures, you mentioned, Daryl, that you guys use a tent with a stove. Is that kind of a mandatory thing up there, given how cold the temperatures can get? You probably want to have a setup that has a stove, and I guess also a safety precaution just in case you do tip in. Is that what you guys would recommend?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. Matt talked about just drying your clothes out. I mean, there's some days where you just got bad weather, and at the end of the day, you're just wet, and it's not like you've got 3 different outfits with you. You can't carry that much gear, so you've got to dry that stuff out. And so the wood stove allows you to dry it all out, and we've got ours all rigged up so that we can have clothes hanging all over it and, stoke that baby up at night, and everything's dry in the morning. So it's pretty nice to have the tent and the wood stoves, just, for safety-wise, survival-wise.
Yeah.
I mean, opening day this year, I was dead set on getting to a spot, probably 2 miles from where our camp was. And I took off, and I had all the right gear, all dressed in wool. And we had just gotten like 10 inches of snow up there, and there was snow on every tree, and everything was just wet. And I got to the first spot that is a great spot, and I was just like, no, I really want to get to that spot. And long story short, by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was so wet that I was sitting back at camp drying my stuff out. I got to a point where I was like, I'm done hunting for the day. Now I'm going to go back and dry my stuff out and make sure that I can hunt tomorrow. So,
yeah, it definitely seems like it's the kind of trip that sometimes just comes down to survival. It's a hunting trip, but it's also just a can you make it out here? It's not an easy landscape, very unforgiving, sounds like, which is definitely something that makes for one of those types of adventures that are so special too. So I have 2 more quick logistical questions before we move on. One, what's your recommended way of getting a deer out? Do you guys like to quarter it up and put it in game bags like you're out west, or what do you do there, Derek?
we just drag it out, put it in the canoe, and take pictures the whole way out. Pretty cool. It's like a big celebration coming out. It's a ton of work, but we'll drag it right across the portages, and it's a ton of work, but it's just a great day.
Man. So that was my final question then, and that's good to know that that's how you guys are doing it. So the portages, I got to imagine with so much gear and so many different things, I was just curious if you have a certain process to make it as easy as possible, or a certain, I don't know, anything you do different or unique to handle a portage with, all sorts of hunting gear, rifles, stuff to live in, gear, maybe a deer, food, any way of packing things out or whatever it is to handle those types of, getting from one lake to one lake type situations?
Yeah, we have, great gear, great bags. And the one thing we've learned is it's better to have things in a bag. You can grab 6 things in one hand and 6 things in the other hand, and it's just hard to balance and get it across the portage like that. So we'll use our bags, their canoe packs, and most of the time on the way in, it's 3 trips in on each portage. It's not a lot. You just take your time, and then on the way out, deer, we're looking at probably 3 trips out with all of our gear in our boat, and then get the deer across. Which is, if you shoot a buck up there, it's over 200 pounds. So dragging a buck across these portages is a ton of work.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you'd be crazy to quarter a deer. We just have always just dug it out and put in the canoes and taking pictures. And
sounds like a heck of an experience, that's for sure. But am I right in assuming it's all worth it?
Oh yeah, absolutely, it's worth it. Absolutely, it's worth it. The first year the first year that I hunted up there with Daryl, and coming out on the morning we were coming out, you got a lot of work to do. Packing up, breaking the camp down, making sure everything's clean, not leaving any junk behind. You got to paddle, you got to unload everything, at the portage. You got to carry everything over the portage. You got to grab your canoe and carry that over the portage. And you got to load it again. And if the last step, if you've got a doe or a buck to drag over, is that. And that is the most exhausting leg of any portage. It's absolutely exhausting. But every step of the way you get closer. By the time you got everything back in your vehicle and you're driving back, that year, Daryl's nice enough to, have me, allow me to butcher the buck at his place. And, good advice. It still took me a long time to get it done. Get all the meat packaged up, and by the time you're done with that, it's late at night, midnight maybe. You've had an enormous day, an enormous amount of work, and nonetheless, even if it's the most work you ever put into an outdoor experience, it was still the most fabulous hunting experience I've ever had.
Yeah, and there's some years where the weather we can't go. We've had a few years as my kids were growing up that I didn't go because I wanted to just spend those young years with my kids in the deer stand. And I did it with both of them. My oldest is 20 and my youngest is 14. And now they're old enough that I've told both of them, you guys bow hunt and just know that I'm going to be gone for that first week of deer hunting. And, my little one says, well, when can I go? I said, you can go whenever you want to go. But this is what it's all about. And so whenever you're ready for that, then you can come and I'll teach you everything that I know. And I think the little one for sure is going to come someday. I'm not sure when. Big one might come too. So they both ask a lot of questions and have a ton of interest in it.
It's just got me over here kind of chomping at the bit Just all the stories of I'm one of those types too that I'm kind of a glutton for punishment. I enjoy a good sufferfest, so it sounds like this is a great combination of so many of my loves. But man, it seems like such a unique deer hunting opportunity, and any kind of outdoor experience. It sounds like it'd be pretty incredible there. But from a deer hunter perspective too, that just seems like one of, if not the most unique deer hunting trip you could do in the United States compared to what most other, deer hunting spots are like or experiences are like. So it's just got a tremendous amount of appeal to me. But I could probably rant and rave and wonder about deer hunting in the Boundary Waters for 3 hours. But real quick, Lucas, you, I know, do a lot of upland hunting out there too, and fishing. Can you give us a quick primer on what the upland and fishing is like out there before we move on? But before that, let's take a quick break for a word from our partners at Whitetail Properties.
This week with Whitetail Properties, we are joined by Justin Mason, a land specialist out of Illinois. And Justin is going to be telling us about what are some of his favorite scouting strategies for this time of year.
And my go-to spot at the end of winter has to be kind of those thick bedding sanctuary areas. Primarily I'm doing two things late winter, starting to look, for sheds, but then also trying to figure out, if I can nail down specifically more of the deer pattern, travel pattern. So I'll usually go into the kind of the south-facing slopes up towards the top of the ridge, find some of that thicker habitat with maybe some locust trees, because oftentimes they'll go to those locust pods and feed on them, or honeysuckle. Anything kind of the thicker the better, so that I can really dive into and see how they're traveling through it, and hopefully I can score and pick up a shed.
If you'd like to learn more and to see the properties that Justin currently has listed for sale, visit whitetailproperties.com/Mason. That's MASON.
Man, we could talk about the fishing opportunities up there until we're blue in the face. Like I mentioned before, I grew up doing spring opener lake trout trips, and it's the same rules apply that Matt and Daryl are talking about. You have situations there where the water is so cold, the ice is possibly coming out. You have to be extremely prepared. You run into crazy different weather situations. I've been stuck in camp because of 3 to 4 foot rollers for 2 days on one of the larger lakes out there, to waiting for ice out to come out. But the rewards outweigh the risk always up there. And if you're smart about it and you're safe and diligent on the way you're approaching it, it's always a life-changing experience. Again, for me, the lake trout trips are always the best, and getting up there and enjoying that situation where there's not too many people up and having fun with your friends. For lake trout, it's just a one-of-a-kind experience. It's a world-class experience, especially when you can get into them. One of the best fish I've ever had as a, shore lunch meal in camp. As a chef myself, I can say right now that is probably one of the best meals I've ever had. And my mouth is watering just thinking of it at the moment. Walleye in June, July are just, it's so awesome. The colors on those fish are so much different. Again, referencing back to just the way the ecosystem up there is up there. It's just amazing. You have amazing pike fishing opportunities depending upon how you approach. Fly fishermen, this is a great opportunity for people to go up there, and it's something that I just got into too, and it's so much fun. I just took my dad last year on a really cool smallmouth bass trip, just as the actual spawning was happening, and we got into them, and it was so awesome. We were trying to outrun thunderstorms. We sat there and the fish were so active. We caught about 60 fish in about 3 hours.
Jeez.
Had to camp out on a site just to wait out the storm, and got back, and we were battling as we're paddling through as the storm was coming back, and got back to camp and threw out some bobber sets with leeches as we were making dinner, and caught walleye for the next morning. The fishing opportunities up there are bar none the best experience I've ever had freshwater fishing. Rough grouse hunting, that's something a little bit newer to me. I've been doing it for the last handful of years. We've, at the campaign, we've been doing some really awesome, media journalist trips where we're bringing people up, field and stream, and lots of different, writers, outdoor news. And we had a really cool trip in October where we went up to this lake called Rose Lake up the Gunflint side, which is the eastern side of the BWCA. And, we went out, and these guys were fly fishing for pike and smallmouth bass, and awesome walk, again, referencing what Darryl was saying earlier about the border route trail, and going on a 3-4 mile hike and shooting a couple birds and bringing them back for dinner. Rough grouse up there is amazing. And I'm actually, come to think of it, one of the first times I met Darryl, we were speaking at a event that Sportsmen for the Boundary Waters was having up in Duluth, and he was just talking about rough grouse hunting up there too, and it's just an amazing opportunity for that. And you can go up and do an awesome casting blast up there in October as well. So you get up and do some, late season smallmouth bass and northern pike, and put a couple rough grouse in the pan, and you're pretty much good to go on a great cool night without the bugs. Yeah, I can't even begin to describe the experiences up there, but what I've always said to people is you won't know until you get up there yourself.
Yeah.
If I could add to what Lucas is saying, in my 20s, that's kind of how I really started exploring the backcountry of the Boundary Waters, is grouse hunting. And I did have a dog, but the grouse are a lot like the deer. They do not expect to see human beings. You'll rarely flush a grouse. Once they figure out it's a human being, then you might flush it, but they just don't expect to see people. And, you're sneak hunting deer up there. They don't expect a person to come walking through the woods. So can you sneak, 15, 20 yards from a deer? You can. They're not used to seeing people up there. And then when they do see you, they're gone. But the grouse are a lot the same way. And there are a lot of grouse up there, and it's a great place to go grouse hunting. Yeah, it really is, and you don't want to say an untouched landscape, but it has a minimal footprint that gives you so many amazing opportunities to experience wonderful fishing and hunting opportunities. So I'm just happy for every experience I've ever had up there, and grateful for the people I've brought up, and grateful for the people that I know that care about it as much as I do.
Just hearing you guys talk about all this, I'm already sitting here thinking to myself, is there any way I can get a summer trip in too? It sounds like there's just there's no shortage of reasons to get out there and check this place out. An October trip might not be enough, but I think we've very clearly established that this is a special place, and unique experiences can be had there that I'm really excited to see and feel myself. But the whole reason why this whole area really came to my attention, though, was because it's a place that's at risk. And Matt, you touched on this a little bit towards the beginning, but I'd love for you to really dive in a little bit deeper for us. And what's going on with the Boundary Waters? What's the history of why people first started getting concerned about some things going on? I think it was maybe in 2014 or 15 where some concerns were being raised. And can you walk us through what's happened, and then where do we stand most recently with some changes that were announced at the end of 2017?
The big threat to this place, which is a place defined by water and a place that every American equally owns, is from sulfide ore copper mining. And it's very, very different from the mining that Minnesotans are familiar with, which is iron mining, taconite mining. Sulfide ore copper mining is a class of hard rock mining, and it has a horrible record of polluting. And it's the pollution we're talking about is heavy metals like arsenic, cadmium, mercury, and because the low-grade ore that now we have the mining industry has technology to mine these low-grade deposits. They just make the mines bigger and they operate on slimmer margins. There's interest in mining a very large, very, very low-grade deposit. It's actually a string of 4 little deposits that are right alongside and underneath the South Quashue River and Birch Lake, which are 2 water bodies just outside of the wilderness boundary, but that flow, the water from there flows into the wilderness. And these deposits, 4 of them, 2 of them would be surface mines, open pit mines, and 2 of them would be deeper than that, underground. There'd be a couple square miles of surface infrastructure for processing the ore, storing all the materials that they would use, various energy infrastructure, roads, pipelines, and then there'd be an enormous tailings basin that would be, well, they've got 7,000 acres locked up now that would provide space for the tailings basin. So that's more than 10 square miles. So this is it's a very real threat. The company at issue is the Chilean copper mining company. It's the 8th or 9th largest copper mining company in the world, and it's called Antofagasta. They have a record, as reported in the newspapers and prosecuted in Chile, of water pollution down there, even though where their mines are in the high desert down there, one of the driest regions on the planet, there's very, very little water. Even there, they managed to pollute water. And that company, Antofagasta, bought up and now completely controls 2 companies that one called Twin Metals, the other called Franconia Minerals. And those 2 companies, have this plan to build a series of 4 mines. And given the track record that we've seen, even with modern mines in the United States, they pollute. So it's a very, very real threat. And what we're working to do is to first prevent the mining companies from getting expired leases renewed. I can talk about that in a little bit, because the leases say in the terms of them that they convey the right to mine. The second thing we're trying to do is to make sure that the federal lands just outside of the wilderness boundary, but in the area that drains into the wilderness, those lands are put off limits to any new mineral leasing for 20 years. We want a 20-year timeout, and if we get that, then we will take the fight to Congress and ask Congress to pass a law permanently protecting those federal lands in that watershed. So the current position we're in is one where the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management are asking for input. We've got a comment period that closes next Wednesday, the 28th of February. And Sportsmen for the Boundary Waters has a petition up on our website, and we ask everybody to sign that petition. It's a first thing that people can do to help. Express support for putting these lands off limits for 20 years. Express support for continuing the study of the proposal, whether this is the right or the wrong place, this water-rich environment, whether it's the right or the wrong place for the most polluting type of mining in the country. And after you've signed the petition, call your U.S. senators and call your U.S. your House member, your representative, congressman, and tell them that you want a flagship wilderness area on national forest lands that we all own together protected. The only way, given the track record of this industry, the only way to protect this area is to put those lands off limits to mining for 20 years. So that's the fight. It's a worthy cause, a worthy goal, and we definitely need your listeners to take these relatively small actions and speak up and support the cause.
So let me play devil's advocate here. Let's say I'm a guy or girl who excuse me, I'm a guy or girl here who says there are millions of acres of public land up in northern Minnesota. I believe that there's nothing wrong with resource extraction on some of our public lands. Why are you guys making such a big deal about just 4 little mining leases in this area? So what, if someone's saying that to you, I'm curious what your reply would be, and then also help us understand, what if this happens? What if the leases get approved? What if Twin Metals goes in here and makes these mines, starts going through these processes? What's the impact on the boundary waters, on the hunting and fishing? I mean, what's the actual thing at stake here?
Sure. Well, so I don't have a problem with resource extraction. I went to forestry school. Right now, a lot of the lands that are at issue here, they are, it's working forests. It provides habitat, and the Forest Service manages it for a variety of uses, and timber harvest is one of those uses. This proposal to put the land off limits to sulfide or copper mining doesn't affect that. It'd still be logging. So it's not really about resource extraction. That's the first thing I would say. Second, I would say that with regard to Minnesota's, number one mining activity, iron mining, taconite mining, this withdrawal doesn't affect that. It doesn't stop any of the taconite mines, because those taconite mines, iron mines, they're in other locations digging other ore. So that's really important to get across. Finally, I would say that, there is this idea that, and the mining industry takes advantage of this in pretty much every state where they try to get a mine in, where they talk about how every state's got the best environmental protection measures and laws in the nation. And they say, we can meet those laws. Well, at the same time, they're often at the state legislature trying to roll back the laws they don't like. So they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. The other thing is, mining companies exist for one reason: to return a profit, the greatest profit that they can to their shareholders, and to leave all the risks, long-term risks of pollution, with the hole in the ground that they walk away from when they're done. That's what they do. They sing their swan song when they try to woo communities to let them come in and mine, and they don't walk into these communities. They don't walk into the city hall, and say, we'd like to come here, we'd like to take away the wealth and send it to our boardroom, and we'd like to leave you with ruined landscape and polluted water that's going to last for 200 years. That's not what they say. They tell a very different story. But if you go and look at communities that used to be major mining communities, they're Libby, Montana, and other places. They are, while they have many great attributes, one of them is not lots of beautiful, lands and clean water. That's taken away when you start talking about hard rock mining, sulfide ore copper mining. That's taken away. So what would happen if they get in? Here's what would happen: the sulfide ore copper, the sulfide copper ore that they dig up, very, very low grade ore. 99.5% of that is going to stay, in the region. And but it's not going to be the big block of bedrock it once was, which didn't pollute. Bedrock really doesn't pollute because it weathers so slowly. It takes millennia. It takes ages to weather, and so it doesn't pollute. But when you grind that, amount of rock up, amount of rock many times bigger than the U.S. Bank Stadium where the Super Bowl was just played. Many times bigger. You grind that up to the fineness of face powder. You expose all of that rock to air and water, and the sulfides in it convert to sulfuric acid. And that sulfuric acid leaches down through that tailings, through that waste rock, and leaches out the heavy metals that I talked about earlier, which are neurotoxins. They get into the fish, they get into the water, and if you eat fish, they're going to get into you. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin, and it does damage to the developing brains of fetuses and young children, nursing children, and kids in their grade school years, and it reduces their IQ. And if you have a reduced IQ, you've got a reduced total earning capacity for your life. This is not just about, this is not some little thing. It's we're talking about centuries, and I don't say that lightly. 200 to 500 years minimum of pollution would come from these sites. And it would flow right into the heart of the boundary. So that really would do grievous damage to what is the essence of the boundary waters, and that's clean water. But luckily, we don't have to go this route because there are lots of places to mine copper. Copper is copper is copper. You can mine it anywhere, but there's only one boundary waters. And people should keep that in mind. If you're in favor of resource extraction, that doesn't mean you have to, mine it everywhere. Right? So,
yeah,
that's what I would say.
That's always something that I think about a lot too. Being against something like this doesn't mean that you're taking some full sweep against all mining or logging or drilling or whatever type of resource extraction at question might be. But as a hunter, as an angler, as a hiker or a paddler, someone who understands these places and appreciates these places, I think it's pretty fair to say, at least from my perspective, that can't we have some of these places that are too special to risk some of these things? Can't we find some areas that we can say, all right, this is a place where maybe this isn't the right use. Maybe the highest use here is wildlife habitat and recreation and a quiet space. To your point, there are plenty of places where you can mine copper or where you can do X, Y, or Z. I think I remember, and someone's going to email me and tell me I'm wrong on this, but I believe the number I saw was that 90% of our federal public lands are open to resource extraction, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe it's okay that we can have a little buffer strip here around one of the most special places that we say, no, we need to be a little extra careful here. That doesn't seem so outrageous to me, at least, given such...
No, it's not, right. Yeah, I agree with you. It's not outrageous. I mean, we're lucky enough to have, inherited this wonderful place. It would be awfully wonderful if we were able to hand it down to our kids and grandkids in the same condition that we got. Mm-hmm. So the country is, we've got a strong country, a wealthy country, and we can afford to borrow from somebody else who talked about this issue. We can afford to protect boundary waters.
Lucas, would you add anything on this, given that you're obviously very active with this campaign as well?
No, absolutely. Everything that Matt said is completely on point, and it is very important that we take all measures that we can to, protect this world-class hunting and fishing destination. There is no reason these companies should be taking the measures that they are to extract the minerals that they're looking to do. We only have a certain amount of areas here in this nation that, support the opportunities that we have, especially the public lands that we have. And, that was referenced earlier, east of the Rockies and north of the Everglades. This is the largest and most visited wilderness in the nation. So for future generations, this is one of the most important areas that we have that's been set aside and started initially by Teddy Roosevelt. So we need to make sure that we do everything that we can and we do our due diligence to make sure that this exists for future generations to experience, and also to support the economic driver that this space is in northeastern Minnesota, because it really is. And I mean, it's a trickle-down effect. Something happens where there is pollution from this type of mining, which is inevitable, and it will affect companies from local to large. It will affect the flora and fauna all the way from micro to macro. And we have a situation here where we need to make sure that we protect something that is so important to the future of everybody here in the U.S. So, yeah, I could not agree more with anything that Matt just said.
But, everybody should say, should sign a petition and say, yes, protect this area, put it off limits to mining for 20 years. It's the wrong place for sulfide or copper mining.
So that sounds like number one action item. The easiest action item is go sign this petition, make your voice heard, at least in that way, that there are a lot of sportsmen and women who support this place. And I would say, even if you haven't been to this area yet, even if you haven't been or don't even plan to, it's a place that I think that we as a hunting and fishing community should stand up for, simply because of the fact that it offers opportunities, that it offers the potential for something. And having a few places like that left, at least in my opinion, is something worth having and something worth standing up for. So sign the petition. And Matt, what would be your number 2 and number 3 actions? I think you mentioned placing a phone call or email to your representatives. Was that number 2?
Yeah, I would say number 2 is to call both of your U.S. senators, whatever state you're from, and tell them that the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness is Minnesota's Yellowstone, and that they want to see it protected. That message will get through to people. And the third thing would be to more or less do the same thing with your member of the U.S. House, your congressman or woman. Doesn't take anybody more than 10 minutes to check all 3 of those boxes off, and you'd be doing a great service. Not just, in case you want to use it in the future, enjoy it in the future, but if you've got kids, or if you support the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, and the Edge of the Boundary Waters support the only wilderness base camp for the Girl Scouts in America. And it supports one of the few national high adventure camps for the Boy Scouts, the Summers base camp for the Boy Scouts. So, even if you don't think you're going to go, you may know, a kid in the Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, and they should have a chance to experience this place in its prime.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm excited to get my own firsthand experience with this place this fall. And I think anyone listening, I got to believe a lot of people listening have probably been intrigued to maybe someday put this on their bucket list and experience it too. So it seems pretty clearly we've got our action orders if we want to keep this place as special and pristine as it is right now. There's a few easy actions that we can take, and I'll certainly be doing that probably tonight, right after we finish this conversation, and I'd encourage anyone else listening to do the same thing. I guess real quick, if we have any quick final thoughts, Daryl, do you have any final things you want to leave us with before we wrap it up?
I had one other hunting story that I wanted to tell you just to get you fired up about going there.
Perfect.
So one year I shot a big buck with my bow, and I told Matt, I said, I'm just going to bring my dog and grouse hunt. And he said, no, you can hunt on my tag. And I said, all right, well, how big does the deer have to be if I fill your tag? He said, 10 points. So it was a couple days into the hunt, and it was kind of sleeting out, and I found a log to sit on, and I trimmed out this white spruce tree and sitting on the log, and it was just a beautiful afternoon, and grunted a couple times and kept sitting there, and all of a sudden I saw this nice buck. It was an 8-pointer, real white rack, beautiful buck, but it was 8 points. And it walked off in front of me and kind of got into a bunch of spruce trees, and I couldn't see it, and I thought, well, I'm going to have some fun with it. So I grunted at it to see if I could get it to come back. And sure enough, it came back. And keep in mind, I'm sitting on the ground underneath this white spruce tree. It never saw me. And it came back, and then it moseyed back into the spruce trees again. And so I thought, I'm going to grunt one more time just to see if I can bring it back one more time. So I grunted. 10 seconds later, one of the loudest, deepest grunts I'd ever heard in my whole life was right behind me. I turned around, and over my right shoulder was the biggest buck I'd ever seen in my whole life. Dark face, dark rack, 15 yards away from me, looking right at me. And we just stared at each other. I couldn't make a shot because I had to turn completely around. I'm right-handed, and I would have to stand up to do that. And just sat and stared at it. And finally, after about 2 minutes of staring at it, I decided to go for it, and I stood up and tried to make the shot, and I couldn't make the shot. But Matt still, to this day, laughs at me because from that point on, I carry a 44 Magnum with me, just in case I'm ever in and have to make that shot at that buck.
Wow. That is pretty cool.
He was a beast.
And I got to believe that big, dark, big-bodied northern Minnesota buck puts a lot of deer across the country to shame as far as just pure mystique. I'd have to believe.
That one still haunts me.
That's awesome. Well, yes, you were right. That one definitely did get me pumped. I can't wait to get out there now. Lucas, any final parting words for you?
Yeah, actually, I have a story too I'd like to tell. One of the first years that I went up, and of course, like I mentioned earlier, that my dad introduced me to the BWCA. We were on a lake called Tuscarora, which is up on the Gunflint side, and out on our normal camp. And we knew there was a snowstorm coming in, and we were prepared and, ready for the next morning, knowing that we were going to be catching some fish. In the middle of the night, we saw a canoe coming from across the lake, and we were wondering where they were going. Their original destination was going to an island that was about a quarter of a mile away from where our camp was at the moment. And it was a father and son, and they were ill-prepared. They came over. We lit a fire for them and fried up some lake trout and had them stay with us, paddled them over to their camp that they were originally going to go to on that island that their original destination was. Where I'm going with it is just like we talked about, you got to just make sure you're prepared. They learned a lesson, but I've been in contact with them, and they've gone back up every year, and it's been a really cool experience, and they're really awesome people.
That's great. And a great reminder too of how easily things could go wrong if you weren't prepared. I imagine they would have had a much less enjoyable night if you guys hadn't been there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, kind of the foundation of the way I look at going up there on trips now too. So
that's awesome. Well then, Matt, any final words for you? You've shared a lot with us on the policy standpoint. I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to share or not.
I guess I'd just point out that you mentioned that the Boundary Waters is a very accessible place. And Lucas has mentioned that it's the most visited wilderness in the country. And, pretty much any night, well, not pretty much, any night spent in the Boundary Waters is a backcountry night. But because the paddling, because you're paddling and because the water carries the weight of all your gear, except on the portages, it is a very accessible place, at least during, the summer months. It's accessible to a parent or parents who want to take young kids in. It's doable. You can do it. You'll have a great time. I have seen young parents with a newborn baby in the Boundary Waters. It's actually doable. There are things that you could do there that you can't do on a long backpacking trip west. And I think partly it's the beauty of the place, the ability, depending on your time of the year, to get out and really experience some solitude, particularly early and late seasons, that makes it such an attraction to so many people. And we've talked about hunting and fishing and some of the policy questions, but for a lot of people in northeastern Minnesota, the Boundary Waters is one of the reasons that they live there. It's an important place, to the culture of Minnesota and to the population in northeastern Minnesota, and it drives the economy in a way, that's it includes, but it's bigger than the hunting and fishing and recreation. So I guess that's it.
All right, perfect. Well, I'll tell you one thing. If nothing else has been achieved here tonight, at the minimum, you guys definitely did a really good job of getting me fired up. I'm ready to get out there, and probably a few folks listening are too. So I guess I gotta say though, I hope for Daryl's sake that no one listening, that none of you guys go out there, and I don't want to see you out there either. So in all seriousness though, this has been just really interesting. It's neat to get insight into a very different kind of place than where some of us spend our time hunting and all the other things that we love to do: fishing, camping, paddling. It seems that this is just top of the line as far as what you can get back into. So I'm excited to see it. I appreciate you guys sharing with us your experiences, your insights, helping us better understand what's happening with this place and why it's at risk and what we can do about it. So this has been very helpful, very interesting, and appreciate you guys being a part. All right, folks, and that is going to do it for this episode. That said, I appreciate you listening. And as I said earlier, I think this is an opportunity for us as a hunting community here to step up and make a difference for a place that maybe we personally won't, but a lot of people go to enjoy, whether it be deer hunting or fishing or canoeing or kayaking or camping. It's a special place. It's close to a lot of us deer hunters here in the Midwest, and we can make an impact. So here's what I would just reiterate. As Matt mentioned, please, if you can, take a second to sign those petitions he mentioned. I have them both linked on the blog post for this. So if you go to wiredhunt.com, click on the blog post for this podcast episode, you're going to see the petition there linked for Sportsmen for the Boundary Waters, or you can go to sportsmenfortheboundarywaters.org and sign right there. And the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers organization also has a petition they're working on. So if you go to the link on my website, you can sign that as well. I'm going to be posting about this on Instagram. So if you want to help out there, you can go on Instagram and repost that to your own page. Share the link to these petitions there. I'm going to be tweeting about this today and over the course of the next few days. Retweet that, share that around. And then if you have the time, make a call to your senators, make a call to your representatives. It's a quick way that you can stand up for one specific place. And I think if we can come together as a group and help in this instance, maybe 6 months from now there's somewhere else that's maybe closer to you, and we can all rally around that issue. And maybe a few months after that there's going to be something else, and we're going to stand up for that too. That's what I hope for this community that we've built here with Wired to Hunt, is not only do we care about our own personal deer hunting behind our house or in our little neck of the woods, not only do we want to fill the freezer, not only do we want to kill a big mature buck, but we also want to stand up for these places where we can hunt, where we can fish, where we can go adventure. We enjoy these places, so I think because of that, we also have an obligation to try to speak up for them too. At least that's the way I see it, and I'm trying to do my best to show that example, and maybe we can all do that together. So that's the end of my sermon here today. I appreciate you guys hanging on for that and tuning in. And finally, I guess we'll just wrap it up with our final thank you to our partners who do make all this possible. So big thanks to Sitka Gear, Yeti Coolers, Matthews Archery, Maven Optics, the Whitetail Institute of North America, Trophy Ridge, and Huntera Maps. And of course, and again, thank you all. I appreciate you being listeners. I appreciate you being supporters of these types of causes. I appreciate you being just genuinely good people. This Wired Hunt community is awesome. You guys are the best. I appreciate you. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.